Do you remember the exact moment you realized you were the only adult in the house, even though you were only 8, 9, 10 years old? Do you remember that unsettling feeling, looking at your parents and understanding with a clarity that no child should possess, that they were more lost than you were? Carl Jung dedicated his life to studying something he called archetypal reversal. And what I'm about to reveal today will explain why you feel responsible for everyone around you, why you struggle to ask for help, why the idea of being cared for makes you uncomfortable, and most importantly, why there's a part of you that was never allowed to be a child. But before we continue, I need you to understand something crucial. This isn't about blaming your parents, it's about finally understanding what happened to you. Because when a child is forced to take on the role of an adult, something inside them shatters. And this fragmentation has a name. Jung called it dissociation of the self, and the consequences last a lifetime. So stick with me until the end, because what I'm about to reveal could be the key to understanding patterns you've been repeating for decades without knowing why. There's a wound that's rarely named. It doesn't leave visible scars. It doesn't show up on tests. But it's there, pulsing in silence, controlling every decision you make. It's the wound of the child who was never a child. Jung described how the child's psyche needs a specific environment to develop. The child needs to be contained. They need parents who function as what he called an alchemical vessel, a safe space where they can be vulnerable, dependent, imperfect, where they can make mistakes without catastrophic consequences, where they can simply exist without having to produce, solve, or keep anyone emotionally stable. But what happens when this vessel doesn't exist? What happens when, instead of being contained, the child needs to contain their own parents? Jung observed that at that moment, a fundamental reversal occurs. The child is forced to develop what he called a premature adult persona, a mask of maturity, an armor of responsibility. And this mask becomes so glued to their face that the child forgets there's something underneath. But hold on, because what's coming is even more disturbing. Let me tell you about Emily. She was 7 years old when she realized her mom couldn't function alone. Her dad had left. Her mom fell into depression. And Emily, at 7 years old, would wake up in the middle of the night to check if her mom was breathing. She made the coffee, reminded her mom to take her medication, made up excuses at school when her mom couldn't get out of bed. Emily didn't know it, but she was performing what Jung called archetypal compensation. When the maternal archetype fails to fulfill its function, the child's psyche tries to fill the void. But here's the devastating problem that few understand. The child doesn't have the psychic resources for this. They're trying to do the job of an adult with a mind that's still forming. And the result, Emily's true self, that spontaneous, creative, vulnerable part, was locked away in a dark room of the psyche. And there it remained, frozen, waiting for permission to exist. Emily is 42 years old today. She's been married 3 times. All times to men who needed to be taken care of. It wasn't a coincidence. It was what Jung called repetition compulsion. The psyche endlessly recreates the conditions of the original wound in an unconscious attempt to finally resolve it. But there's a detail that changes everything. Remember this, because it will make sense later. Emily didn't choose these men consciously. She was drawn to them. There was something about them that made her feel at home, and that something was exactly the dynamic she knew. Taking care of someone emotionally unavailable. Jung explained this through the concept of a complex. A complex is like a program that runs in the background of the mind, You don't choose to activate it. It activates itself when it finds the right trigger. And for Emily, the trigger was anyone who emanated a need for care. Now pay attention, because here's the part that no one talks about. Parentification isn't just about having too many responsibilities. It's about a fundamental reversal of the psychic order. Jung understood that there are archetypal roles in the family. The mother is the vessel. The father is the structure. The child is the seed that needs to be nurtured to grow. When these roles are reversed, when the child becomes the vessel for the parents, what occurs is what Jung called archetypal contamination. The child absorbs psychic content that doesn't belong to them, carries emotions that aren't theirs, solves problems they shouldn't even know about. And the price? The development of the child's own self is paralyzed. Let me show you how this works in practice. Michael was the oldest of 4 siblings. His father was an alcoholic. His mother worked 2 shifts, and Michael, at 9 years old, became the father of his younger siblings. He woke them up for school, prepared the meals, helped with homework, resolved the fights, protected the younger ones when his father came home drunk. Michael developed extraordinary competence. Everyone admired his maturity. The teachers praised him. The neighbors commented, "What a responsible boy." But no one saw what was happening inside. Jung spoke about this. When a child is praised for being an adult, they receive a devastating message. The message is this: you're only valuable when you're not a child. You're only loved when you function, when you solve, when you take care. And do you know what Michael did with this message? He incorporated it. It became part of his identity. He no longer knew who he was without the role of caregiver. Today, Michael is 53 years old. He recently retired, and he fell into a deep depression. You know why? Because when you build your entire identity on top of a functional role, when that role disappears, you disappear with it. Jung called this identification with the persona. The mask became the face, and now Michael needs to do something he's never done in his life. Discover who he is, beyond the role of caregiver. But wait, because we haven't reached the most important part yet. There's a mechanism that Jung identified that makes parentification especially destructive. He called it libido inversion. Under normal conditions, the child's psychic energy flows outward to explore the world, to play, to discover, to create. But when the child is parentified, this energy needs to flow inward into the family, inward into the parents' problems, inward into crises that aren't theirs. And do you know what happens to a plant that can't grow outward? It withers, or it grows in a distorted, contorted way, trying to find any crack of light. The parentified child does the same thing. They develop what we call a pseudo-maturity. They appear mature on the outside. They function impressively. But on the inside, there's a child who was never given permission to exist. And that child doesn't just disappear. They're still there, waiting, demanding attention. Remember Emily? At 42, after her 3rd divorce, she finally sought therapy. And you know what she discovered? That beneath all that competence, all that ability to care for others, there was a 7-year-old girl who still woke up in the middle of the night, terrified. Carl Jung explained that the true self cannot be destroyed. It can be repressed, hidden, locked away, but it's still there. And it keeps sending signals, through dreams, through symptoms, through repetitive patterns that make no logical sense. Emily had a recurring dream. She was in a huge house, taking care of dozens of people, running from room to room, attending to endless needs. And somewhere in the house, she'd hear a child crying, but she could never find where it was coming from. When she finally stopped to explore this dream in therapy, she understood. The child crying was herself, locked in a room that she'd forgotten even existed. This is what Carl Jung called the positive shadow. We normally talk about the shadow as the dark side, the rejected aspects. But for the parentified child, the shadow contains something precious. The lost spontaneity, the abandoned vulnerability, the ability to simply be without having to do. But recovering that isn't simple, because there's a huge resistance. Think about it. If you've spent your whole life being the strong one, the responsible one, the one who solves everything, how do you just stop? How do you admit that you need care? How do you accept help without feeling like you're failing? Carl Jung understood that this resistance isn't stubbornness, it's survival. The parentified child learned very early on that depending on others is dangerous, that showing vulnerability is risky, that the only person they can trust is themselves. And now you want them to just unlearn that. Michael discovered something fundamental in his therapy. He realized that every time someone offered help, he felt anger. It didn't make sense. The person was being kind, but he felt anger. When he explored that anger, he found its origin. The anger belonged to the 9-year-old boy, the child who took care of everyone and was never cared for, the child who needed to be strong because no one was strong for him. That anger had been stored away for over 40 years, and now it finally had space to exist. Carl Jung had a concept that perfectly illuminates this. He called it repressed affect. Emotions that haven't had space to be expressed don't just disappear. They're stored in the body, in the psyche, waiting for the moment to emerge. And when they emerge, they come with full force, because repressed emotion is like water behind a dam. The longer it's contained, the greater the pressure. Michael cried for the first time in decades in that therapy session. And it wasn't just any crying. It was the crying of 40 years of accumulated exhaustion, 40 years of being strong, 40 years of carrying the world on his shoulders, 40 years of pretending that everything was okay. You might be wondering now, but if parentification is so damaging, why do parents do it? That's the question everyone wants to ask, and the answer is complex. Carl Jung understood that most parents don't parentify their children out of malice. They do it because they were also wounded children. They do it because they haven't developed their own psychic resources. They do it because they're drowning in their own unhealed wounds. Emily's mother, the one who went into depression, had herself been parentified as a child. She took care of her own mother, who was an alcoholic. She never learned to regulate herself emotionally. She never had a functional adult model. And when she became a mother, she simply repeated the pattern. Not because she was bad, but because it was all she knew. Carl Jung called this the generational transmission of trauma. Unresolved complexes pass from generation to generation like an invisible inheritance, until someone has the courage to look at the wound and say, "Stop here. This cycle ends with me, but hold on, because there's one more layer that needs to be revealed." Parentification manifests in different ways depending on the gender of the child and the family dynamics. Parentified girls often become emotional caregivers. They learn to read their parents' moods, to anticipate outbursts, to calm storms, to keep the peace at any cost. They develop what we call emotional hypervigilance, and they carry that into all future relationships. Parentified boys often become functional caregivers. They take on practical responsibilities. They fix things. They solve problems. They protect the family. And they develop an identity completely based on utility. If I'm not being useful, I have no value. In both cases, the true self is buried, but the manifestations are different. Sarah was the emotional caregiver of her mother. Since she was little, her job was to keep her mother happy. When her mother was sad, Sarah felt like it was her fault. When her mother was angry, Sarah tried to fix it. When her mother threatened to hurt herself, Sarah panicked and did anything to prevent it. Today, Sarah is 38 years old and unable to say no to anyone, in any situation. Because deep down, there's still that girl who believes that her job is to keep everyone emotionally stable. Carl Jung explained that this pattern creates what he called porosity of boundaries. The child never learned where they end and the other begins. The emotions of others become their emotions. The problems of others become their problems. And they can no longer distinguish what is theirs and what belongs to the other person. This is devastating for adult relationships. Sarah married a narcissistic man. It wasn't by chance. Narcissistic men can sense a person without boundaries from afar. They can sense someone who will accept everything, someone who will erase themselves to keep them happy. And Sarah did exactly that for 12 years, until one day her body said enough. She developed a severe autoimmune disease. Her body was literally attacking itself. Carl Jung understood the connection between psyche and soma. He knew that what the mind represses, the body expresses. Sarah's body was screaming what she had never been able to say: "I'm destroying myself to keep you whole." It was the disease that led her to therapy, and it was in therapy that she finally found that girl who had been trained to disappear. But I want you to understand something crucial now. Parentification isn't binary. It's not a question of if it happened or didn't happen. It exists on a spectrum. Some children were completely parentified. They took on the role of adults entirely. They took care of siblings, of parents, of the house, of everything. Other children were partially parentified. They assumed certain functions at certain times. They were their mother's emotional confidant, or the mediator between fighting parents, or responsible for a specific sibling. And then there's an even more subtle form, invisible emotional parentification, where the child doesn't take on practical tasks, but becomes the emotional regulator of the family. The child everyone looks to see if everything is okay. The child who absorbs the tension of the environment so that others can function. This form is the hardest to recognize because there's no external evidence. The child seems normal, but inside they're carrying the emotional weight of an entire family, a huge burden that no child should ever carry. Michael was this kind of child. He never cooked for his siblings, never took care of anyone in a practical way, but he was the emotional barometer of the house. Everyone looked to him. If Michael was calm, things were okay. If Michael was tense, something was about to explode, and Michael learned to always stay calm. It didn't matter what he was feeling inside. On the outside, he was the anchor, the center, the stability, a seemingly unshakable rock in a turbulent sea. This came at a high cost, a cost that he is still paying to this very day. Michael is now 45 years old and suffers from alexithymia. He literally can't identify what he's feeling. He spent so much time disconnecting from his own emotions to regulate others that now he doesn't know how to access himself anymore. He's a stranger to his own inner landscape. When the therapist asks him what he feels, Michael falls silent. It's not resistance, it's genuine inability. He never developed emotional vocabulary because his emotions never mattered. What mattered were the emotions of others. Carl Jung spoke about the need for what he called mirroring. A child needs to see their emotions reflected back by their parents. And it's through this mirroring that they learn to know themselves. It's through the eyes of their parents that they develop self-awareness, that crucial foundation of self-understanding. But Michael was never mirrored. He only mirrored others. His eyes were always turned outward, monitoring others, never turned inward, getting to know himself. A tragic loss of self-discovery. And now you understand why parentification is so profound. It's not just about having too many responsibilities. It's about a fundamental inversion of psychic development. The child who should be looking inward and discovering who they are is looking outward and discovering what others need. A distorted and painful reality. The self remains in the dark, without light, without attention, without development, stunted. A seed that never gets the chance to bloom. And here we arrive at something that Carl Jung considered fundamental to understanding healing, true healing. He spoke about the process of individuation, the path of becoming who you really are. And for the parentified child, this path begins with an apparent paradox, a seeming contradiction that holds the key to freedom. You need to become a child again, a child that was tragically robbed from you, not in a literal way, of course, but psychically. You need to recover those parts of yourself that were abandoned when you were forced to grow up too fast. Those precious, innocent parts, spontaneity, the ability to play without purpose, vulnerability, the permission to not know, the acceptance of needing help. These are the lost treasures we need to rediscover. For many, this seems impossible. How can I, who have always been the strong one, admit weakness? How can I, who have always taken care of others, ask for care? It feels like an insurmountable barrier. Carl Jung understood this resistance and offered a perspective that can change everything. A radical shift in perspective that can unlock profound healing. He said that recovering the inner child is not weakness. It's the deepest form of strength, because it takes courage to undo decades of conditioning. It takes courage to be vulnerable when you've been trained to be invulnerable. It takes courage to receive when you only know how to give. It is a heroic act of self-reclamation. Emily, the one who woke up in the middle of the night to take care of her mother, went through this process. It was painful, it was slow, but it was transformative. A journey of profound healing and self-discovery. She started with small things, learning to say no, learning to ask for help with simple things, learning to allow others to take care of her in small doses, baby steps towards freedom. And each time she did this, she felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief because she was finally releasing the weight. Terror because she was violating all the programming of her childhood, breaking free from deeply ingrained patterns. This terror is normal. Carl Jung called it the resistance of the complex. The caregiver complex doesn't want to die. It has been your shield for decades. It's part of your identity. And now you're asking it to go away? It's going to put up a fight. Of course it will resist. But here is the secret that few therapists reveal. A profound truth that can change everything. You don't need to kill the caregiver. You need to put it in the right place. To redefine its role. The ability to care that you have developed is a gift. It's a real skill, a powerful and valuable attribute. But it was developed at the cost of your own childhood. And now it needs to be balanced. It needs to be integrated in a healthy way. Balancing means learning to take care of others without abandoning yourself. It means learning to be helpful without losing your identity in it. It means learning to help others without needing them to need you. This is the delicate dance of healthy connection, and the hardest step, learning to receive, allowing yourself to be cared for. Michael, the one who felt anger when offered help, discovered something amazing in therapy. The anger wasn't against the person offering. The anger was against himself, for needing, for being human, for not being the unshakable rock he pretended to be, a facade that hid deep pain. When he finally understood this, something shifted. A profound inner transformation began. He started practicing what his therapist called active receiving. Instead of refusing help automatically, he paused, breathed, and chose to accept, even when every cell in his body screamed to refuse. A conscious act of defiance against years of conditioning. And you know what happened? In the beginning, it was horrible. He felt exposed, vulnerable, wrong, like he was breaking a fundamental rule of his existence. But little by little, something gave way. That 40-year-old armor showed cracks. And through those cracks, something began to enter that he hadn't felt since he was 9 years old. A feeling he had almost forgotten. Peace. A quiet, profound peace. The peace of not having to carry everything alone. The peace of allowing others to be strong for him once in a while. The peace of finally resting. A deep, restorative rest that had been denied for far too long. But I need to be honest with you now. Brutally honest. This process is not fast. It's not linear. It's full of relapses. You will have days when you automatically revert to caregiver mode. Days when you find yourself solving problems that aren't yours. Days when you completely forget about yourself. These setbacks are inevitable, and that's okay, because decades of conditioning don't unravel in weeks. It takes time, patience, and unwavering self-compassion. Carl Jung understood that individuation is the work of a lifetime. It's not a destination, it's a journey, a constant process of becoming. And every small step counts, every act of self-care, every moment of vulnerability, every brave choice to honor your true self. Now I want to speak directly to you, to your heart. If you recognized your story in what I've described so far, I want you to know a few things. These truths are essential for your healing journey. First, it wasn't your fault. You were a child. You did what you needed to do to survive. You developed extraordinary skills in circumstances that no child should face. This isn't weakness, it's resilience. It is a testament to your inner strength. Secondly, your parents were likely wounded children themselves, doing the best they could. This doesn't absolve them of responsibility, but it helps to understand that the cycle is bigger than any one individual. Thirdly, you can change. The very fact that you're here, watching this, already shows that a part of you wants something different, that a part of you knows there's more, that a part of you is tired of carrying the world on their shoulders. That part deserves to be heard. You've just discovered something that many people go through life without ever understanding. Parentification isn't just an academic concept. It's a real wound that affects millions of adults without them even knowing the name of what they experienced. This knowledge that I've just shared comes from 50 years of research in analytical psychology, from real cases, from real people who have found paths to healing. Inspired by the works of Carl Jung, a pioneer in the exploration of the human psyche, and if you feel that this content has made a difference, if you recognized your story, if you finally have words to name what you've lived through, I have a request. The super thanks button right below isn't just financial support. It's you saying that this type of information needs to continue existing. It's you saying that parentified children deserve to understand what happened to them. And it's you becoming part of something bigger than just watching a video. Each person who clicks on that golden heart helps to create more content like this. More stories told, more silenced voices heard, more cycles broken. If this video touched you, consider that gesture, not for me, but for the next person who needs to hear exactly this. Now, before we finish up, I want to leave you with something practical. Carl Jung believed that the path to healing begins with awareness. You can't heal what you don't recognize, so the first step is exactly what you've done now. Recognize, name, understand. The second step is more difficult. It's starting to practice the opposite of what you were trained to do. If you were trained to give care, practice receiving. If you were trained to fix things, practice asking for help. If you were trained to be strong, practice showing vulnerability. Start small, very small. Accept a compliment without minimizing it. Let someone help you with something simple. Say no to something without explaining why. Each small act is a message to that child who still lives inside you. The message is, you can rest now. You don't need to carry everything anymore. Someone's taking care of you now. That someone is you. And the third step, perhaps the most important, be patient with yourself. You've spent decades building this armor. It's not going to fall off in a day, and that's okay. Every crack is already a victory. Every moment of allowed vulnerability is already a triumph. Every time you choose yourself is already a revolution. Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For the parentified child, this means something very specific. It means finally having permission to be a child, no matter your age. No matter how many decades have passed, that child is still there, still waiting, still wanting to know if they can finally step down from the adult role. And the answer is, yes. You can. The path is long, the work is deep, but the reward is something you may have never experienced. The freedom to simply be, without needing to prove anything, without needing to fix anything, without needing to take care of anyone before taking care of yourself. Just exist. Just breathe. Just allow it to finally be your turn. That's the promise of individuation for someone who has been parentified. It's not that you're going to stop caring for others, it's that you're finally going to learn to include yourself in that care, to put yourself on your own priority list, to treat yourself with the same compassion that you've always given to others. Before you go, I want to hear from you. How old were you when you realized you were the adult in your house? What was the exact moment when you understood that you were taking care of the person who was supposed to be taking care of you? Tell us in the comments. Because every story shared here helps other people recognize their own journey, and there's nothing more powerful than knowing that you're not alone. That child who grew up too fast, who carried too much weight, who took care of everyone but themselves. They deserve to be seen, finally.